Blood was never supposed to stain the marble floors of Adriano Romano's penthouse. Yet here he stood, looking down at the crimson pool spreading beneath his head of security, a man who had been like a brother to him for 15 years. The silence in the usually bustling space felt heavier than death itself. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that their betrayal didn't just break your heart, but shattered your entire understanding of the world around you? That's exactly what Adriano was experiencing as he stared at the evidence of his cousin Marco's treachery scattered across his coffee table. 48 hours earlier, everything had been different. The Romano family had been preparing for what should have been a routine business meeting with the Torinos, their oldest allies in the Chicago underworld. Adriano had trusted Marco with the security arrangements, had watched his cousin personally vet every guard, every entrance, every possible threat. What he hadn't expected was for the threat to come from within his own blood. The meeting had been a massacre. 6 of his best men dead, 3 more in the hospital, and Adriano himself barely escaping with his life. The Torinos had known exactly where to hit, exactly when his guards would be distracted, exactly which routes to block. Information that only someone with intimate knowledge of Romano operations could have provided. Now, as sirens wailed in the distance and the scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air, Adriano Romano faced a reality he'd never imagined. He couldn't trust anyone in his own organization. At 34, he controlled one of the most powerful crime families in the Midwest, commanded the loyalty of hundreds of men, and had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. Yet he stood alone in his penthouse, vulnerable as a child. His phone buzzed. Lucas Santelli, his most trusted lieutenant, and the only man he was certain hadn't been compromised. "We need to talk," the message read. "Found someone." 20 minutes later, Lucas sat across from Adriano in the secure study, a manila folder between them. The older man's weathered face showed the strain of the past 2 days, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled from sleepless nights spent hunting traitors and arranging protection. "I know this isn't what you want to hear," Lucas said, his gravelly voice careful and measured. "But we need outside help. Someone with no connection to the family, no loyalty except to the job." Adriano's jaw tightened. He'd built his reputation on the strength of family bonds, on the sacred trust between men who'd sworn blood oaths to protect each other. The idea of hiring a stranger, an outsider, felt like admitting defeat. "What are my options?" he asked, though every instinct rebelled against the question. Luca opened the folder and slid a single sheet across the mahogany desk. Military background. Army Rangers, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Specialized in close protection and tactical assessment. Impeccable references from private security firms. Clean background check. No family connections to organized crime. Adriano glanced at the resume, noting the impressive credentials, the commendations, the specialized training. Everything looked perfect on paper. Too perfect. "What's the catch?" Luca shifted uncomfortably. "Well, boss, she's not exactly what you usually." "She?" Adriano's voice rose slightly. "You want me to trust my life to a woman?" "The best candidate we found," Lucas said firmly. "And given our current situation, we can't afford to be picky about gender." Adriano studied the name at the top of the page, Zara Williams. Even the name felt foreign in his world of Marcos and Louis Cass and Antonios. 28 years old, decorated veteran, expert marksman, hand-to-hand combat specialist. On paper, she was exactly what he needed. In reality, she represented everything his traditional world had taught him to distrust. "Set up the meeting," he said finally, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. "But I'm not promising anything." 2 hours later, Adriano found himself questioning every decision that had led to this moment. He stood in his living room, the blood finally cleaned from his marble floors, waiting for a woman he'd never met to arrive and potentially save his life. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man who'd spent his entire adult life surrounded by armed guards now found himself desperately hoping a complete stranger would prove competent enough to keep him breathing. The elevator chimed, and Luca's voice carried through the intercom. "She's here, boss. Send her up." Adriano straightened his tie and tried to project the same commanding presence that had served him well in boardrooms and back-alley negotiations. He was Adriano Romano, heir to a legacy that stretched back 4 generations, master of an empire built on respect and fear. He would not be diminished by circumstances, even these circumstances. The elevator doors opened, and every preconception he'd harbored shattered. Zara Williams was not what he'd expected. She moved with the fluid grace of someone trained in combat, her posture alertly relaxed in the way that spoke of constant situational awareness. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with rich dark skin that seemed to glow under the penthouse's carefully arranged lighting. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun that emphasized the elegant line of her neck and the sharp intelligence in her dark brown eyes. She wore a perfectly tailored black suit that managed to be both professional and subtly form-fitting, suggesting rather than hiding the athletic build beneath. Everything about her appearance spoke of discipline, competence, and quiet confidence. She was beautiful, Adriano realized with uncomfortable surprise, but it was a dangerous kind of beauty, the kind that came with calloused hands and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Romano," she said, stepping forward with her hand extended. "Zara Williams, thank you for considering me for this position." Her voice was warm and professional, with just a hint of Chicago's South Side in the vowels. When he shook her hand, he felt the strength in her grip, the slight roughness of skin that spoke of weapons training and physical labor. Her eyes met his directly, without deference or challenge, simply the steady gaze of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Ms. Williams," he replied, gesturing toward the sitting area. "Please, have a seat. Would you like anything to drink? Coffee, black, if you have it." She settled into the leather chair across from him with the same controlled grace she'd shown entering, her posture straight but not rigid, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her eyes, he noticed, did a subtle but thorough scan of the room, cataloging exits, sight lines, potential threats. Professional habit, clearly, but it impressed him despite himself. Adriano poured coffee from the service Luca had arranged, using the familiar ritual to buy himself time to process his unexpected reaction to her presence. He'd been prepared for many things, but not for the way his pulse quickened when she smiled her thanks, or the way her competent demeanor challenged everything he'd assumed about women in his world. "I've reviewed your credentials," he began, settling back in his chair. "Impressive military service, excellent recommendations from your private sector work. But I have to ask, Ms. Williams, what makes you think you can handle protection for someone in my particular line of business?" Her smile was slight and knowing. "Mr. Romano, I've provided security for ambassadors in war zones, CEOs with cartel death threats, and federal judges during organized crime trials. I'm familiar with the unique challenges that come with your lifestyle. The question isn't whether I can handle it. The question is whether you can handle having someone like me in your inner circle." The directness of her response caught him off guard. "Someone like you?" he repeated, not entirely sure what she meant, but certain it touched on something he wasn't ready to examine. "Someone who doesn't fit the traditional mold of your organization," she said evenly. "Someone who might challenge assumptions about how protection should work. Someone who brings different perspectives and different skills to the table." There was no accusation in her voice, no edge of anger or defensiveness. She was simply stating facts, laying out the reality of the situation with the same calm professionalism she might use to discuss tactical formations or weapon specifications. Somehow, that made her words hit harder than any confrontation would have. Adriano found himself studying her face, looking for signs of judgment or superiority, but found only patience and quiet confidence. She was waiting for his answer, clearly prepared for him to say no, but not bothered by the possibility. Her self-assurance was unsettling in the best possible way. "What would you need to do the job effectively?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Full access to your schedule, your properties, your vehicles. Complete authority over security decisions during high-risk situations. And honesty about threats, both external and internal. If someone in your organization poses a risk, I need to know about it immediately." The last requirement hung between them, heavy with implication. She knew about Marco, of course. Luca would have briefed her on the current situation. But hearing her address the betrayal so directly, so matter-of-factly, made something in Adriano's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "And if I agreed to those terms," he said slowly, "when would you be available to start?" "I'm available now, Mr. Romano. My bag is in the car downstairs. If you decide to hire me, I'm prepared to begin immediately." The casualness of her statement hit him like a physical blow. She'd come prepared to move into his life, into his space, based on nothing more than a phone call and a background check. Either she was incredibly naive about what she was walking into, or incredibly confident in her ability to handle whatever came next. Looking at her steady gaze and relaxed posture, he strongly suspected it was the latter. "You understand that this would mean living here, in the penthouse," he said. "Close protection requires constant proximity, especially given the current threat level. There would be very little privacy, very little personal time." "I understand," she replied simply. "I've done close protection before. I know what the job requires." "And you're comfortable with that? Living in the same space as someone you've just met? Trusting someone whose world is very different from yours?" Something flickered in her eyes then, the first crack in her professional composure. For just a moment, he caught a glimpse of the woman beneath the bodyguard, someone who was perhaps not quite as certain as she appeared. "Mr. Romano," she said quietly, "I've trusted my life to strangers in much more dangerous situations than this. And frankly, given what happened to your previous security team, I think the question of trust is one you might want to consider more carefully than I do." The words stung because they were true. He was the one whose judgment had failed, whose trust had been betrayed. She was offering to put her life on the line for a man she'd met 20 minutes ago, while he sat here questioning her competence based on nothing more than his own prejudices. The realization was humbling in a way Adriano Romano was not accustomed to experiencing. "All right, Ms. Williams," he said, standing and extending his hand again. "You're hired. Luca will show you to your room and brief you on the current situation. We'll start fresh tomorrow morning." When she took his hand this time, her smile was different. Warmer, more genuine, as if his acceptance had removed some barrier he hadn't even known existed. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said. "I won't let you down." As she followed Luca toward the guest wing, Adriano found himself watching the confident set of her shoulders, the alert way she moved through his space, as if already cataloging its vulnerabilities and strengths. She paused at the hallway entrance and looked back at him. "Mr. Romano? One more thing. I sleep light, and I'm armed. Just so there are no surprises if you need anything during the night." The warning was delivered with the same professional courtesy as everything else she'd said, but something in her tone made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business arrangements. "Noted," he replied, his voice rougher than he'd intended. After she disappeared down the hallway, Adriano stood alone in his living room, surrounded by the familiar luxury of his domain, and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of an hour, his world had shifted in ways he was only beginning to understand. He'd hired Zara Williams to protect his life. What he hadn't anticipated was how much her presence might complicate everything else. Adriano woke to the unfamiliar sound of someone moving quietly through his kitchen. For a split second, muscle memory kicked in and his hand reached for the Glock he kept in his nightstand drawer. Then awareness flooded back. Zara. His new bodyguard was already awake, already working. He'd barely slept, hyper-aware of the presence of another person in his space. Not since he was a child living under his father's roof had anyone else inhabited his private sanctuary. The knowledge that she was just down the hall, alert and armed, had created an odd tension in his chest that he couldn't quite categorize as comfort or unease. Rolling out of bed, he pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, then padded barefoot toward the kitchen. What he found there stopped him in his tracks. Zara stood at the massive windows overlooking the city, a tablet in one hand and a steaming mug in the other. She'd changed from yesterday's formal suit into dark jeans and a fitted black sweater that emphasized her athletic build. Her hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and the morning light streaming through the glass highlighted the elegant line of her profile. She looked impossibly beautiful and completely professional at the same time, and Adriano felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. "Good morning, Mr. Romano," she said without turning around. "Coffee's fresh. I took the liberty of reviewing the building's security footage from last night and checking the perimeter protocols." "Already working, I see," he replied, moving to pour himself coffee from the pot she'd prepared. "Find anything concerning?" She turned to face him then, and he was struck again by how directly she met his gaze. "No immediate threats, but your building's security system has some vulnerabilities I'd like to address. The parking garage has 3 blind spots, and your private elevator can be overridden from the building's main security office. Adriano sipped his coffee, impressed despite himself by her thoroughness. It was barely 7 in the morning, and she'd already done more security assessment than his previous team had managed in months. "You've been busy." "I don't sleep much anyway," she said with a slight shrug. "Military habit. I'd rather be useful than stare at the ceiling." There was something in her tone, a carefully controlled neutrality that suggested there were reasons she didn't sleep well. Adriano found himself curious about those reasons, about the experiences that had shaped the confident woman standing in his kitchen as if she belonged there. "What's on the schedule today?" she asked, consulting her tablet again. "Morning meeting with my accountants, lunch with my mother, and dinner at Gino's with some associates. Nothing particularly high risk." Zara nodded, making notes. "I'll want to scout the restaurant in advance and coordinate with your driver about route security. Also, I'd recommend varying your schedule going forward. Predictable patterns make you vulnerable." The suggestion was delivered matter-of-factly, but Adriano bristled slightly at being told how to manage his own life. He'd been handling business in this city for over a decade without needing a handbook on basic security. "I've been eating at Gino's every Tuesday for 5 years, he said, hearing the edge in his own voice. "It's family tradition." Zara looked at him steadily, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she could read every thought crossing his face. "Tradition is what got your security team killed, Mr. Romano. Predictability is a luxury you can't afford right now." The bluntness of her statement hit like a slap, partly because it was true and partly because no one in his organization would dare speak to him so directly. In his world, disagreement was couched in careful language, wrapped in deference and respect for hierarchy. Zara Williams, apparently, had missed that particular memo. Before he could respond, the intercom chimed. "Mr. Romano, this is building security. There's a delivery here for you." No sender identification, but the courier insists it's urgent. Adriano moved toward the intercom panel, but Zara's hand shot out to stop him. "Don't," she said quietly. Her entire posture had changed, shifting from relaxed to alert in the space of a heartbeat. "When did you last receive an unidentified delivery?" "Never," he admitted, suddenly seeing the situation through her eyes. She was already moving, pulling her phone from her pocket as she headed for the elevator. "Stay here," she instructed. "Don't answer the door, don't accept anything. Don't even look out the window until I give the all clear." The elevator doors closed before he could argue, leaving him alone in his penthouse with the uncomfortable realization that she was right. An unidentified delivery less than 3 days after an assassination attempt was exactly the kind of detail he might have overlooked in his eagerness to return to normal routine. 20 minutes later, Zara returned with a small package in her hands and a grim expression on her face. "False alarm," she said, setting the box on his kitchen counter. "Birthday gift from your nephew in college. But it was delivered by a courier service that doesn't normally work this building, and the timing was suspicious enough to warrant caution." She'd had the package X-rayed by building security, she explained, and called his nephew to confirm he'd sent it. Every precaution taken, every angle covered, all while he'd stood in his kitchen feeling frustrated by her presumption. "Thank you," he said quietly, and meant it. "You were right to be cautious." Something in her expression softened at his admission. "That's what you're paying me for," she said. "Better safe than sorry, especially right now." The rest of the morning passed smoothly, with Zara accompanying him to his meeting with the accountants and demonstrating a professional discretion that impressed his business associates. She positioned herself strategically in the conference room, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to avoid eavesdropping on sensitive financial discussions. Adriano found himself watching her more than he should have, noticing the way she tracked every person who entered the room, the subtle way she adjusted her position to maintain sight lines to all exits. She was good at her job, better than he'd expected, and the realization was both reassuring and oddly unsettling. Lunch with his mother presented a different challenge. Sofia Romano was a formidable woman who'd spent 60 years perfecting the art of reading people, and Adriano knew she'd have opinions about his new security arrangement the moment she laid eyes on Zara. They met at his mother's favorite restaurant, a small Italian place in Little Italy that had been serving the Romano family for 3 generations. Adriano watched Zara scope the location as they entered, her trained gaze cataloging customers, staff positions, and potential threats with the same thoroughness she'd shown at his penthouse. "Adriano, darling," his mother said, rising from her usual corner table to embrace him. "And this must be your new bodyguard." Sophia Romano was elegant and sharp-eyed, dressed in the kind of understated luxury that spoke of old money and older traditions. She extended her hand to Zara with the gracious courtesy of someone accustomed to being deferred to. "Mrs. Romano," Zara said, shaking the offered hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Please, call me Sophia. Any friend of Adriano's is family." Adriano watched the exchange with interest, curious how his traditional mother would react to his unconventional choice of protection. What he hadn't expected was the way Sophia's eyes lit up with genuine warmth as she studied Zara's face. "You know," she said, settling back in her chair, "it's refreshing to see Adriano finally showing some sense about security. A woman's intuition is worth 10 men's training when it comes to spotting trouble." The approval in his mother's voice surprised him, but not as much as the pleased flush that colored Zara's cheeks at the compliment. She was tough enough to handle armed threats and professional enough to command respect from his business associates. But a kind word from his elderly mother could still make her smile like a girl receiving praise from a beloved teacher. The observation stirred something warm and protective in Adriano's chest, an emotion he wasn't quite prepared to examine. Lunch conversation flowed easily, with Sophia drawing Zara out about her military service and her family background. Adriano learned that Zara had grown up on the South Side with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. That she joined the army at 18 partly for the college benefits, and partly because she needed structure and purpose. That she'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before a roadside bomb injury ended her military career and led her to private security work. She spoke about her experiences with matter-of-fact honesty, neither dwelling on trauma nor minimizing the challenges she'd faced. There was strength in her narrative, resilience earned through genuine hardship, and Adriano found himself admiring more than just her professional competence. "Tell me, dear," Sophia said as they finished their meal, "what do you think of my son's approach to personal security? Any suggestions for improvement?" Zara glanced at Adriano with a small smile. "Your son has excellent instincts, but he's too trusting of familiar people and places. Comfort breeds complacency, which breeds vulnerability. And how do you plan to address that?" His mother asked, clearly enjoying the conversation. "By making him uncomfortable," Zara replied simply. "By changing routines, questioning assumptions, and never letting him forget that safety requires constant vigilance." Sophia laughed, a delighted sound that drew glances from other diners. "I like her," she announced to Adriano. "She's exactly what you need." Later, as they walked back to the car, Adriano found himself processing his mother's easy acceptance of Zara. Sophia Romano had very definite ideas about appropriate roles for women, ideas shaped by decades of traditional Italian-American family structure. Yet she'd embraced Zara immediately, recognizing something in her that transcended conventional expectations. "Your mother is lovely," Zara said as they settled into the back seat of his car. "Very sharp. I can see where you get your instincts from." "She likes you," Adriano replied. "That's not always easy to achieve. She's protective of you." "I respect that." The simple statement hung between them as the car navigated afternoon traffic toward his office. Adriano found himself studying Zara's profile as she watched the streets, noting the way afternoon light played across her features, the alert relaxation of her posture. She was protective of him too, he realized. It was her job, of course, but something about the way she'd handled the morning's package delivery, the thorough way she'd assessed his mother's restaurant, suggested a level of personal investment that went beyond professional obligation. Evening brought them to Gino's, the family restaurant where Adriano had maintained his Tuesday dinner tradition for years. It was here, surrounded by familiar faces and comfortable routine, that Zara's value became truly apparent. They'd been seated for barely 10 minutes when she leaned close to him, her voice low and urgent. "The man at the bar in the leather jacket. He's been watching you since we arrived, and he paid for his drink but hasn't touched it." Adriano glanced casually toward the bar, noting the man she'd indicated. Mid-30s, unremarkable appearance, nursing a beer that he hadn't lifted to his lips in the 5 minutes since it had been served. Nothing obviously threatening, nothing that would have caught his attention under normal circumstances. Could be coincidence, he murmured. Could be, she agreed. But he followed us here. I spotted him outside your mother's restaurant 2 hours ago. The revelation sent ice through Adriano's veins. Someone had been tracking their movements, watching him through what should have been a routine family day. If Zara hadn't been paying attention, if she hadn't noticed a face in one crowd and remembered it in another, he would never have known he was being hunted. What do you recommend? He asked, trusting her judgment completely for the first time since he'd hired her. We finish dinner normally, leave through the back exit, and see if he follows. If he does, we deal with it. If not, we assume surveillance and adjust accordingly. The rest of the meal passed in attention only they shared. Adriano went through the motions of his usual conversations with restaurant staff and family friends, but his attention remained split between social obligations and the man at the bar who never quite looked directly at them but never stopped watching either. When they finally left through the kitchen exit, Zara's hand rested lightly on his arm, her body positioned to shield him from potential threats. The alley behind the restaurant was dimly lit and quiet, perfect for an ambush. They made it halfway to the car before the man in the leather jacket stepped out from behind a dumpster, and Adriano realized with crystal clarity that his old approach to security would have gotten him killed. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but felt like an eternity. The man raised something toward them, and Zara moved faster than Adriano would have thought possible. She slammed into him, driving him sideways behind a parked car as the sharp crack of gunfire echoed off brick walls. Then she was up and moving, her own weapon appearing in her hands with fluid precision. The confrontation was brief and decisive. The would-be assassin had expected an easy target, not a trained professional who had already spotted him and planned for exactly this scenario. When silence returned to the alley, Zara crouched beside Adriano, her hands moving quickly over his body to check for injuries. Are you hit? Any pain anywhere? He shook his head, still processing the speed and efficiency with which she'd neutralized the threat. I'm fine. How did you know? Training, she said simply, helping him to his feet. An instinct. That's why you hired me. As sirens approached and the familiar chaos of crime scene management began, Adriano looked at the woman who had just saved his life and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. Zara Williams was not just competent or professional or unexpectedly beautiful. She was extraordinary, and he was beginning to realize that his life would never be quite the same again. The dead man in the alley had carried no identification, but his weapon told a story. Zara spread the disassembled pieces across Adriano's dining room table like a puzzle she was determined to solve. The modifications were professional grade, the serial numbers expertly filed away, and the ammunition was hollow point, designed for maximum damage. This wasn't random, she said, her fingers tracing the weapon's components with clinical precision. Someone paid good money for a clean hit. The question is, who knew you'd be at Gino's last night? Adriano watched her work from across the table, still processing the previous evening's events. Seeing her in action had been revelatory. The woman who made coffee in his kitchen and charmed his mother over lunch was also a lethal force capable of ending threats with surgical precision. The duality was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. I've eaten there every Tuesday for 5 years, he said. It could have been anyone. But not everyone knew you were going yesterday. You changed your usual time because of the meeting with your mother. Zara looked up from the weapon, her dark eyes sharp with focus. Who did you tell about the schedule change? The question hit like ice water. Adriano mentally reviewed the previous day's communications, tracking every conversation, every text message, every casual mention of his plans. The list was disturbingly short. Luca, obviously. My mother. And Marco. Marco. The name hung between them like a physical presence. His cousin, his blood, the man who'd been like a brother since childhood. The same man who'd arranged security for the disastrous meeting with the Torinos. We need to talk to Luca, Zara said quietly. Now, an hour later, the three of them sat in Adriano's study with the door locked and the curtains drawn. Luca looked like he'd aged a decade in the past week, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of stress and sleepless nights. When Zara laid out her analysis of the previous night's attack, his face went gray. Jesus, he breathed. Marco's been feeding them information all along. The confirmation of what they'd all suspected felt like a death blow. Adriano had been prepared for betrayal from rivals, from ambitious underlings, from anyone except the family he'd trusted with his life since they were children running through his father's house. How long? Adriano asked, his voice carefully controlled. Luca rubbed his face with both hands. Could be months. Maybe years. Think about it, boss. Every time we've had intelligence leaks, every time operations went sideways, Marco was in the planning meetings. Zara spread a map of the city across the coffee table, marking locations with red pins. Your penthouse, your office, Gino's, your mother's restaurant. All places Marco knows you frequent. All places where attacks have been attempted or surveillance confirmed. She traced routes between the locations with her finger, her tactical mind clearly working through possibilities and probabilities. He's been building a pattern of your movements, your habits, your security protocols. Last night was supposed to be the end game. Adriano stared at the map, seeing his life reduced to red pins and vulnerable patterns. Everything familiar suddenly felt dangerous. Every routine had become a potential trap. The realization that his own cousin had been orchestrating his destruction was devastating, but what unsettled him more was how completely he'd been blind to the threat. What's our next move? Luca asked. We disappear Marco before he knows we're onto him, Zara said without hesitation. He can't report back if he doesn't know there's anything to report. How quickly can you arrange a meeting? Adriano found himself impressed again by her strategic thinking, by the way she moved seamlessly from analysis to action. She understood his world well enough to know that Marco couldn't simply be arrested or confronted. This required a more permanent solution. I can have him here tonight, Lucas said. Tell him we need to discuss new security arrangements after yesterday's incident. Perfect, Zara agreed. He'll expect you to be shaken up, maybe even paranoid. It won't seem unusual for you to want a strategy session. As Luca left to make the arrangements, Adriano found himself alone with Zara for the first time since the shooting. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a strange mix of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to name. You saved my life last night, he said quietly. I haven't properly thanked you. Zara looked up from the tactical notes she'd been making. That's the job, Mr. Romano. You don't need to thank me. Adriano, he corrected. And yes, I do. You did more than just protect me. You saw a threat I would have missed completely. She studied his face for a moment, and he had the sense that she was weighing whether to say something more. Finally, she set down her pen and met his gaze directly. Can I ask you something personal? She said. He nodded, curious about what could make her suddenly seem less certain. Why does this life matter so much to you? The danger, the constant threats, the inability to trust anyone completely. What keeps you in it when you could walk away and be safe? The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him directly why he'd chosen to inherit his father's legacy instead of pursuing the legitimate business opportunities his education and intelligence could have provided. The answer was complex, rooted in family loyalty and personal trauma that he rarely discussed. My father was murdered when I was 16, he said finally. Shot down in the street like a dog by men who thought our family's power could be broken by killing one man. Zara's expression softened, but she didn't offer platitudes or empty sympathy. She simply waited for him to continue. I was supposed to be with him that night, Adriano went on. Last-minute change of plans kept me home. I spent years thinking about what would have happened if I'd been there, whether I could have protected him, or if I'd just have died alongside him. You were 16, Zara said gently. There was nothing you could have done. Maybe not, but I swore that night that no one would ever destroy what my family built. That I'd be strong enough, smart enough, careful enough to protect what was ours. The words felt strange in his mouth, admissions he'd never made aloud before. And now your own family is trying to destroy you, she observed. That has to be devastating. The understatement almost made him laugh, but the sound that came out was bitter instead. Marco was there that night my father died. He held me while I cried. He swore the same oath I did, promised we'd build something stronger together. I'm sorry, Zara said, and something in her voice made him believe she truly understood the depth of that betrayal. Family should be sacred. What about you? He asked, deflecting the conversation away from his own pain. What made you choose this life? You could have done anything after the military. Why private security? For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. She was quiet for so long that he began to regret asking such a personal question. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. I was engaged when I came back from Afghanistan, she said. To a good man, a safe man. Someone who wanted to take care of me and help me forget everything I'd seen over there. Adriano felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been jealousy, which was ridiculous given that she was clearly no longer engaged and that their relationship was purely professional. What happened? He asked. I couldn't do it, she said simply. Couldn't pretend that sitting in a suburban house planning dinner parties would ever be enough. I'd seen too much, done too much. I needed work that mattered, that used everything the army had taught me. She paused, her fingers drumming lightly against the table. He was a good man, but he wanted me to be someone I couldn't become. Someone softer, more traditional. Someone who would let him handle all the dangerous things while I stayed safe and decorative. The description sparked something angry and protective in Adriano's chest. Anyone who'd seen her work would understand that asking Zara Williams to be decorative was like asking a thoroughbred racehorse to pull a cart. Possible, perhaps, but a criminal waste of her capabilities. His loss, he said, meaning it completely. She looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to understand. Maybe, but it taught me something important about what I need from life. I need to matter. I need my skills to be valued, not hidden away. They fell into comfortable silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Adriano found himself studying her face, noting the way late afternoon light from the windows highlighted the elegant line of her cheekbone, the way her dark eyes seemed to hold depths he was only beginning to discover. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her strength that drew him. Her competence, her courage, her refusal to be anything other than exactly who she was. In his world of carefully constructed personas and strategic relationships, her authenticity was intoxicating. When she looked up and caught him watching her, something electric passed between them. For a moment, the professional distance they'd maintained dissolved completely, leaving only a man and a woman who'd shared danger and trusted each other with their lives. Adriano, she said quietly, her voice carrying a warning he chose to ignore. He started to move toward her, drawn by impulses he was tired of fighting. She didn't retreat, didn't remind him of professional boundaries or appropriate behavior. Instead, she stood to meet him, her dark eyes holding his with an intensity that made his pulse race. They were inches apart when the security alarm shattered the moment. The sharp, insistent sound cut through the air like a blade, instantly transforming them from man and woman to protector and protected. Zara's transformation was immediate and complete. Her weapon appeared in her hand as if by magic, her body shifting into a defensive crouch as she scanned the room for threats. Stay behind me, she commanded, all traces of vulnerability replaced by lethal focus. How many entrances to this floor? The penthouse has 3, he said, his own training kicking in as he pulled his weapon from the desk drawer. Private elevator, service elevator, and emergency stairs. She was already moving toward the security monitor, her movements fluid and purposeful. The screen showed multiple figures in tactical gear advancing through the building's emergency stairwell, their approach coordinated and professional. 8 hostiles, she reported. Military-style equipment, moving in formation. This isn't random violence. This is a coordinated assault. Marco, Adriano said grimly. He must have realized we were onto him. The next 20 minutes redefined Adriano's understanding of what professional security looked like. Zara moved through his penthouse like a force of nature, turning furniture into barricades, identifying fields of fire, and transforming his luxury living space into a tactical fortress. When the attack came, it was swift and brutal. The attackers breached through multiple entry points simultaneously, clearly expecting to overwhelm any resistance through superior numbers and firepower. What they hadn't expected was to face someone with Zara's training and determination. Adriano watched in amazement as she systematically dismantled their assault, using the penthouse's layout to her advantage, turning their coordination against them. She moved with deadly grace, her weapon an extension of her will, each shot precise and purposeful. When it was over and the last attacker lay still, Zara finally allowed herself to breathe. She'd taken a graze across her left arm where a bullet had torn through her sweater, but she was alive, and more importantly, So was he. Adriano found himself kneeling beside her as she examined the wound, his hands gentle as he helped her out of the damaged sweater. The injury was minor, barely more than a scratch, but seeing her blood on his hands triggered something primitive and fierce in his chest. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was slightly unsteady. "Just a graze." "You're not fine," he replied, reaching for the first aid kit she'd insisted he keep accessible. "You're bleeding." As he cleaned and bandaged the wound, their earlier conversation seemed to echo in the space between them. She'd saved his life again, proven her value beyond any doubt, and demonstrated a level of competence that humbled him completely. "Thank you," he said softly, his fingers lingering longer than necessary against her skin. When she looked up at him, her eyes held the same electric awareness that had charged the air before the alarm. But this time, there was something else there too. Something deeper and more dangerous than physical attraction. "Adriano," she whispered, and this time the warning in her voice was much weaker. This time, when he leaned toward her, nothing interrupted them at all. Morning light filtered through the penthouse windows, casting golden streaks across the marble floors where broken glass had been carefully swept away hours earlier. Adriano woke on the couch where he'd insisted Zara rest after the attack, her body curled against his side, her breathing deep and even in sleep. They'd spent the night processing the assault, coordinating with Luca to track down Marco's whereabouts, and ensuring the penthouse was secure. Somewhere in those quiet hours between crisis and dawn, the space between protector and protected had dissolved entirely. Now, watching her sleep with her defenses finally lowered, Adriano felt something settle in his chest that he'd been fighting for days. This wasn't just attraction anymore. It wasn't professional respect or physical desire or even gratitude for her protection. It was something far more dangerous and infinitely more precious. Zara stirred against him, her hand tightening briefly on his shirt before her eyes opened. For a moment, she looked confused, disoriented by waking up in his arms. Then awareness flooded back, and with it, a soft smile that made his heart race. "Good morning," she said quietly, making no immediate move to pull away from him. "Good morning. How's your arm?" He touched the bandage gently, checking for signs of bleeding or inflammation. "Sore but fine. I've had worse." She stretched carefully, wincing slightly at the movement. "How long did we sleep?" "A few hours. Luca called twice, but I didn't want to wake you." The domestic intimacy of the moment struck them both simultaneously. They were discussing sleep schedules and missed phone calls like a couple who'd shared countless mornings together, not a crime boss and his bodyguard who'd known each other less than a week. "I should make coffee," Zara said, but she didn't move to get up. "I should check the security feeds," Adriano replied, equally reluctant to break the peaceful quiet. Instead, they stayed curled together on the couch, both unwilling to return to the professional distance that had defined their relationship. The events of the previous night had stripped away pretense, leaving them with the undeniable truth that they meant more to each other than either had planned. Eventually, practical necessity forced them apart. They moved through the morning routine with a new ease, Zara making coffee while Adriano reviewed security reports, their paths crossing naturally in the kitchen as they prepared breakfast together. The banana pancakes were Zara's suggestion, a comfort food from her childhood that she made with practiced efficiency. Watching her work, Adriano found himself charmed by this glimpse into her personal preferences, by the way she hummed softly while she cooked and unconsciously swayed to music only she could hear. "My grandmother's recipe," she explained, flipping pancakes with casual skill. "She said food should nourish the soul as much as the body." She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Raised me from 12 to 18 after my parents died. Taught me that being strong doesn't mean being alone. That accepting help isn't weakness. Zara glanced at him sideways. Lessons I apparently need to keep learning. The admission hung between them, layered with meaning that went far beyond childhood cooking lessons. Adriano understood that she was telling him something important about trust, about her willingness to let him into her closely guarded world. Over breakfast, they planned the day's strategy for dealing with Marco. Luca had traced his cousin to a warehouse on the south side, a meeting point where they could confront him without risking innocent bystanders. It would be dangerous, requiring careful coordination and absolute trust between them. "I want you to stay back during the actual confrontation," Zara said. Let me handle Marco directly. Absolutely not. Adriano's response was immediate and firm. He's my cousin, my responsibility. This needs to come from me. Zara set down her fork and studied his face. Your cousin has been planning your murder for months, possibly years. He's not going to suddenly develop a conscience because you're blood relatives. I know that. But in my world, certain things have to be done personally. It's about respect and tradition and sending the right message to everyone watching. She was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the cultural dynamics she was still learning to navigate. Finally, she nodded. All right, but we do this as partners. You handle Marco, I handle any backup he might have brought. Partners. The word carried weight beyond tactical cooperation, and they both knew it. They were no longer just employer and employee. They'd become something more complex and far more meaningful. The warehouse confrontation was set for evening, which gave them most of the day to prepare and coordinate. But first, Adriano wanted to introduce Zara properly to his mother. If they were truly going to be partners, Sophia needed to understand how their relationship had evolved. They found his mother in her garden, tending to the roses she'd been cultivating for 30 years. Sophia looked up as they approached, and Adriano watched her sharp eyes assess the subtle changes in their dynamic. The way they moved together, the protective positioning that had become mutual rather than one-sided. Adriano, darling. And Zara, how lovely to see you again. Sophia embraced them both warmly, but her knowing smile suggested she saw far more than she was letting on. Mama, Adriano began, then stopped, unsure how to explain what had shifted between them. You're in love with her, Sophia said matter-of-factly, saving him the awkwardness of explanation. And she loves you. It's written all over both your faces. Zara's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny the observation. Adriano felt his own face warm as his mother's directness cut through any pretense he might have maintained. It's complicated, Mama. The situation with Marco, the danger. Love is always complicated, darling. But that doesn't make it any less precious. Sophia turned to Zara with a warm smile. What do you think, dear? Are you willing to take on my impossible son? I think, Zara said carefully, that your son is worth taking on, complications and all. The simple declaration hit Adriano like a physical blow. In her quiet, honest way, Zara had just announced her commitment to him, to their future, to whatever came next. His mother beamed as if she'd orchestrated the entire conversation. Good, Sophia said briskly. Then you'll stay for dinner tomorrow. Both of you. It's time the family met the woman who's stolen Adriano's heart. Later, as they drove back toward the penthouse, Adriano found himself processing his mother's easy acceptance of their relationship. Sophia Romano had very traditional views about family roles and appropriate partners for her son. Her immediate embrace of Zara suggested she saw something in their connection that transcended conventional expectations. Your mother is remarkable, Zara said quietly. She makes everything seem possible. She likes you. More than that, she respects you. From my mother, that's not easily earned. They spent the afternoon in tactical preparation, reviewing warehouse blueprints and coordinating with Luca's team. But underneath the professional planning, electricity hummed between them. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment of casual intimacy built tension that had nothing to do with the evening's mission. As sunset approached, they found themselves alone in the penthouse, weapons checked and strategy confirmed. The waiting before action was always the hardest part, the time when adrenaline began building and doubts crept in around the edges of confidence. Adriano, Zara said, settling beside him on the couch. There's something I need to say before tonight. He turned to face her, struck by the serious expression in her dark eyes. If something goes wrong, if Marco has more backup than we're expecting, I need you to know that these past few days have been the most real I've felt in years. Working with you, protecting you, falling for you. It's reminded me who I am at my core. The vulnerability in her voice made his chest tight. Nothing's going to go wrong. We're prepared for every contingency. Maybe, but life doesn't always follow the plan. She reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. So I'm telling you now, while I can. I love you, Adriano Romano. Not because you're powerful or dangerous or exciting. Because you're good and honorable, and you make me want to be the best version of myself. The confession broke through the last of his emotional barriers. All the reasons he'd been giving himself for maintaining professional distance. All the practical concerns about mixing protection with personal feelings dissolved in the face of her honesty. Ti amo anchayo, he said softly, reverting to his native language in the intensity of the moment. I love you too, Zara. More than I thought possible. When he kissed her, it was with months of suppressed longing, days of growing connection, and hours of shared danger distilled into a single perfect moment. She responded with equal intensity, her arms sliding around his neck as she pressed closer. The kiss deepened naturally, becoming exploration and promise and claimed territory all at once. Adriano felt her heartbeat against his chest, tasted the sweetness of her response, breathed in the scent that had become as familiar as his own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer fighting their attraction or questioning their compatibility. They were simply two people who'd found something rare and precious in the midst of chaos. Are you sure? He asked quietly, giving her one last chance to maintain professional boundaries. I've never been more sure of anything, she replied, and the certainty in her voice erased his final doubts. What followed was tender and unhurried, a claiming that was mutual and absolute. They moved together with the same intuitive coordination they'd shown in dangerous situations, reading each other's responses, learning each other's desires. Adriano had been with women who wanted his power, his money, his protection. Zara wanted him, just him, flaws and complications included. The difference was intoxicating. Afterward, they lay entwined in his bed, her head on his chest, their breathing gradually returning to normal. The warehouse mission loomed in the near future, but for this perfect moment, nothing existed except them and the connection they'd finally acknowledged. Whatever happens tonight, Zara said quietly, this was worth it. You're worth it. Adriano tightened his arms around her, understanding that she was offering him something infinitely more valuable than professional protection. She was offering him her heart, her future, her complete trust. Nothing's going to happen to us, he promised. We're partners now. In everything. The vow felt like a sacred oath, a commitment that transcended the immediate crisis with Marco. They'd found something worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth building a future around. As night fell over the city and the time for action approached, they rose and prepared together, moving with the fluid coordination of a team that trusted completely. Whatever they faced in that warehouse, they would face it together. The thought of Marco's betrayal still stung, but it no longer had the power to devastate him. He had Zara now, and she had him. They were partners in the truest sense, bound by choice rather than blood, strengthened by trust rather than obligation. Tonight, they would end the threat that had driven them together. Tomorrow, they would begin building something new. The warehouse stood like a monument to Chicago's industrial past, all rusted metal and broken windows against the darkening sky. Adriano sat in the passenger seat of the armored SUV, watching the building through tactical binoculars while Zara coordinated final preparations with Luca's team over encrypted radio. Target is in position. Luca's voice crackled through the comm. Marco arrived 20 minutes ago with 2 vehicles. Looks like he brought backup. How many? Zara asked, her voice calm and professional despite the tension radiating through her body. 8 total, including Marco. All armed, military-style positioning around the perimeter. Adriano felt his jaw clench at the confirmation of what they'd suspected. His cousin wasn't just meeting them to talk. This was an ambush, carefully planned and professionally executed. Marco had never intended for either of them to leave this warehouse alive. Standard formation, Zara instructed. Adriano and I take point. You provide overwatch and handle any runners. Remember, we need Marco alive for questioning. Copy that. We're in position. Adriano checked his weapon one final time, running through mental preparations for what was about to unfold. In a few minutes, he would come face to face with the man who'd been his closest family outside his mother, the man who'd shared his childhood and sworn to protect the family legacy, the man who'd been systematically planning his murder for months. Ready? Zara asked, her dark eyes meeting his across the vehicle's interior. He nodded, drawing strength from her steady presence. Together, they exited the SUV and moved toward the warehouse entrance, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Despite the gravity of the situation, Adriano felt a surge of confidence. They were partners now, in every sense of the word. Whatever they faced inside, they would face it together. The warehouse interior was a maze of abandoned machinery and shipping containers, shadows and steel creating perfect ambush points throughout the cavernous space. Emergency lighting cast harsh angles across concrete floors stained with decades of industrial use. Marco Romano stood in the center of it all, looking exactly like the man Adriano had grown up with. Same dark hair, same family resemblance, same easy smile that had charmed teachers and girlfriends and business associates for 30 years. Only his eyes were different now, cold and calculating in a way that made Adriano's stomach turn. "Cousin," Marco said warmly, spreading his arms as if greeting a beloved relative. "I was starting to think you weren't coming." "I'm here," Adriano replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Let's talk." "Oh, we'll talk. But first, you need to dismiss your bodyguard. This is family business." Zara remained exactly where she was, her weapon ready but not quite aimed, her posture alert but not obviously threatening. She'd positioned herself with clear sight lines to multiple escape routes and optimal cover positions. Professional to the core, even in the face of obvious hostility. "She stays," Adriano said firmly. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say to her." Marco's smile faltered slightly, the first crack in his carefully maintained facade. "That's disappointing, cousin. I'd hoped you'd developed better judgment about who to trust." Ironic words from the man who's been feeding information to our enemies. The accusation hung in the air between them, stripping away any pretense of family loyalty or accidental betrayal. Marco's expression shifted completely, the warm familiarity replaced by something cold and predatory. "You always were too trusting, Adriano. Too willing to believe that blood meant something more than convenience." Why? The single word carried years of shared history, betrayed trust, and genuine pain. Why throw away everything our family built? Marco began walking slowly around them, his movements casual but clearly calculated to position his hidden backup for optimal effect. "Because our family didn't build anything worth keeping. Our grandfather was a thug who got lucky. Our fathers were dinosaurs who couldn't adapt to changing times. And you?" Marco's voice grew harsh with contempt. "You're a romantic who thinks honor and tradition matter more than profit." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the subtle movements of armed men positioning themselves in the shadows. Adriano felt the weight of his family's legacy, for generations of blood and sacrifice and carefully maintained power, being dismissed as worthless by the man who should have helped preserve it. "So you decided to sell us out to the Torinos," Zara said, her voice cutting through the tension with clinical precision. Marco turned his attention to her for the first time, his eyes traveling over her with obvious disdain. "And you decided to sleep with my cousin instead of doing your job. How very professional." The insult sparked something dangerous in Adriano's chest, but Zara remained perfectly calm. Her stillness was more threatening than any display of anger could have been. "My relationship with Adriano doesn't affect my ability to protect him," she said evenly, "as evidenced by the fact that you're standing here talking instead of attending his funeral." Marco's laugh was ugly and bitter. "You think you've been protecting him? You've been making him weak, distracted, vulnerable. The Adriano I grew up with would never have let emotion cloud his judgment. The old Adriano also would never have suspected his own family of betrayal," Zara replied. "Maybe some changes or improvements." "Enough," Marco snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. "This ends tonight. Both of you. The family needs leadership that understands how business really works." Signal lights began flickering in the warehouse's upper levels, and Adriano realized with crystal clarity that they'd walked into a carefully orchestrated trap. Marco's backup wasn't just positioned defensively. They were preparing for a coordinated assault designed to eliminate both targets simultaneously. Zara saw it too. Her body language shifted subtly, muscles coiling for explosive movement, eyes tracking threat positions with tactical precision. When she moved, it was with the lethal grace Adriano was learning to appreciate. "Down," she commanded, and he dropped without question as gunfire erupted throughout the warehouse. What followed was controlled chaos, a deadly ballet of violence and precision that showcased exactly why Zara Williams was the best at what she did. She moved through the warehouse like a force of nature, using cover and concealment with expert skill, turning Marco's carefully planned ambush into a systematic dismantling of his forces. Adriano found himself relegated to the role of observer, watching in amazement as the woman he loved demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond anything he'd imagined. She wasn't just competent or professional or brave. She was extraordinary, and she was completely devoted to keeping him alive. One by one, Marco's backup fell to precise shots and tactical superiority. Zara had studied the warehouse layout, anticipated the ambush, and planned for exactly this scenario. What Marco had intended as their execution became his own downfall. When the gunfire finally stopped, 6 men lay dead or incapacitated throughout the warehouse. Marco stood alone in the center of the space, his weapon trained on Adriano, but his hands shaking with the knowledge that he'd been comprehensively outmaneuvered. "It's over, Marco," Adriano said, rising from cover with his own weapon aimed at his cousin's chest. "Put the gun down. Nothing's over." Marco's voice cracked with desperation and rage. "You think killing me solves anything? The Torinos still want you dead. Other families are already moving against you. This is bigger than just me. Then you should have thought about that before you betrayed your own blood." Marco's eyes darted between Adriano and Zara, calculating odds and finding them hopeless. His carefully planned coup had become a complete disaster, and everyone who might have supported him lay dead around him. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "The old ways are finished. Honor and tradition are weaknesses that will get you killed. I was trying to save the family by adapting to reality. By murdering me?" Adriano kept his weapon steady, feeling the weight of family history and personal betrayal in every word. "By removing an obstacle to progress." Marco's composure finally shattered completely. "You think you can run this organization like it's still 1950? You think loyalty and respect matter more than profit margins and strategic alliances?" "I think family is supposed to mean something," Adriano replied quietly. "I think blood oaths and sacred trusts aren't just words. I think the men who follow us deserve leaders who won't sacrifice them for convenience." The idealism in his cousin's voice seemed to enrage Marco further. "You're going to get everyone killed with that attitude. The world has changed, but you refuse to see it." "The world has changed," Zara interjected, her weapon still covering potential threats from the shadows. "But honor isn't obsolete. Loyalty isn't weakness. And family betrayal is still exactly what it's always been: unforgivable." Marco swung his weapon toward her, his finger tightening on the trigger. "This is all your fault. You made him soft, made him weak." The shot that ended Marco Romano's life came from Adriano's gun, fired without hesitation or regret. His cousin collapsed to the concrete floor, the family resemblance finally erased by the stillness of death. In the silence that followed, Adriano felt the weight of finality settle over him. The threat that had driven him and Zara together was gone, eliminated by his own hand. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed everything he'd worked to build was ended. But as he looked down at Marco's body, he felt no satisfaction, only the profound sadness of opportunities lost and trust permanently broken. His cousin had chosen profit over family, ambition over loyalty, and it had cost him everything. Zara moved to his side, her hand finding his arm with gentle comfort. "It's finished," she said quietly. "He can't hurt anyone else." Adriano nodded, holstering his weapon as Luca's team moved through the warehouse to secure the scene. The immediate crisis was over, but the deeper work of rebuilding trust and reorganizing security would take time. What he had, though, was a partner he could count on completely. Someone who understood both his strengths and his vulnerabilities, who could challenge him when necessary and support him when needed. Someone who'd proven her devotion not through words, but through actions, through skill, through unwavering commitment to his protection. Looking at Zara's steady presence beside him, Adriano realized that Marco had been wrong about everything. Love didn't make him weak. It made him stronger, more complete, more capable of leading with both wisdom and compassion. The old ways weren't finished. They were simply evolving, growing stronger through the addition of new perspectives and new talents, through partnerships that transcended tradition while honoring its best elements. Together, they walked out of the warehouse and into their future. 3 weeks after the warehouse confrontation, Adriano stood in his penthouse looking out over the Chicago skyline and marveled at how different everything felt. The same view, the same luxury, the same city sprawling beneath him. But his entire world had fundamentally changed. The threat that had brought Zara into his life was gone, but she remained, now as his partner in every sense of the word. The organizational cleanup had been swift and thorough. Luca had identified and removed 2 other family members who'd been feeding information to the Torinos, though their betrayal had been motivated by money rather than Marco's twisted ideology. New security protocols were in place, new alliances forged, and new leadership structures established that would prevent such comprehensive infiltration in the future. But the most significant change wasn't structural or strategic. It was personal. "Good morning," Zara said, emerging from the bedroom in one of his dress shirts and very little else, her hair tousled from sleep and her smile soft with contentment. "Buongiorno, Bella," he replied, pulling her into his arms and pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." She settled against his chest, fitting perfectly against his body as if she'd been designed specifically for that purpose. "What's on the agenda today?" "Final meeting with the new security team this morning, lunch with my mother to discuss wedding plans, and then we have that appointment with the real estate agent." Wedding plans. The words still felt surreal, even though he'd proposed 2 weeks ago and she'd accepted without hesitation. After everything they'd been through, after proving their trust and compatibility under the worst possible circumstances, marriage felt like both the most natural next step and the most precious gift he could imagine. "Your mother is more excited about this wedding than we are," Zara observed with amusement. "I think she's planned everything except our vows. She's wanted grandchildren for years, and now she sees the possibility on the horizon. Let her have her fun." The mention of children sparked warmth in both their chests. They'd talked extensively about their future together, about the family they wanted to build and the life they planned to create. Children were definitely part of that vision, though they were in no particular hurry. They had time to simply enjoy being together first. The morning security meeting was a revelation in organizational efficiency. Zara had restructured Adriano's protection protocols completely, implementing systems she'd learned in the military and adapted for civilian application. The new team was smaller but more skilled, more carefully vetted, and more strategically positioned. Most importantly, they reported directly to both Adriano and Zara, recognizing her not as hired help but as family leadership. It was a significant cultural shift for an organization steeped in traditional hierarchy, but one that reflected the new reality of their partnership. "She's impressive," Luca observed privately after the meeting concluded. "Not just as a bodyguard, but as a strategic thinker. Some of these protocols should have been implemented years ago." Adriano watched Zara through the conference room window as she discussed tactical positioning with the team leaders, noting the easy respect they showed her and the confidence with which she managed complex security logistics. "She makes me better," he told his lieutenant honestly. "Challenges me to think beyond tradition without abandoning what works." I never realized how much I needed that perspective. Lunch with Sofia Romano was an exercise in maternal joy barely contained within social propriety. She'd embraced the wedding planning with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession, turning what should have been a simple family celebration into an event worthy of royalty. "The flowers alone cost more than most people make in a year," she announced proudly, showing them photographs of elaborate arrangements. "And the cathedral has been reserved for the ceremony. Monsignor Benedetto will perform the service personally." "Mama," Adriano said gently, "maybe we should ask Zara what she wants before finalizing everything." "Oh, darling, I'm sure she'll love whatever we choose." Sofia beamed at Zara across the restaurant table. "Won't you, dear?" Zara smiled diplomatically, though Adriano caught the slight overwhelm in her expression. "It's all beautiful, Mrs. Romano. Truly. But maybe we could discuss a few details together?" What followed was a delicate negotiation between his mother's vision of an appropriate Romano family wedding and Zara's preference for something more intimate and personal. Compromise was reached through careful diplomacy and mutual respect, resulting in plans for a ceremony that honored family traditions while reflecting their unique relationship. The real estate appointment that afternoon was more successful. They decided to find a new home together, something that belonged to both of them rather than just to his bachelor lifestyle. The penthouse held too many memories of violence and betrayal, too many associations with the darkest period of their relationship. The house they toured was perfect, a restored Victorian mansion in Lincoln Park with original architectural details, modern security upgrades, and enough space for the family they hoped to build. It had character and history without the baggage of his current residence. "I love it," Zara said simply, running her fingers along the carved banister in the front hall. "It feels like home." For Adriano, watching her move through rooms that could hold their future children, seeing her imagine their life together in those spaces, the decision was immediate and final. Whatever it cost, whatever negotiations were required, this house would be theirs. That evening, they hosted dinner for Adriano's extended family, formally introducing Zara as his fiancée and future co-leader of family operations. It was a significant step, both personally and professionally, acknowledging her place not just in his heart, but in the larger Romano legacy. The evening was a success by any measure. Family members who'd initially been skeptical of Adriano's choice were won over by Zara's intelligence, her obvious devotion to his welfare, and her clear understanding of the family's values and traditions. She fit into their world while maintaining her own identity, a balance that impressed even the most traditional relatives. As the last guests departed and they cleaned up together, Adriano found himself reflecting on how naturally Zara had adapted to his life, while simultaneously transforming it. She belonged here, belonged with him, in ways that went far beyond romantic compatibility. "That was perfect," he told her, pulling her close as they stood in his kitchen. "You were perfect. Your family is wonderful. Complicated and intimidating, but wonderful." She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with happiness. "I can't believe this is real sometimes." "Believe it," he said, kissing her softly. "This is our life now. Our future." 6 months later, they stood together in the cathedral where 4 generations of Romano men had married, exchanging vows that promised partnership, protection, and unconditional love. Zara wore his grandmother's pearls with a modern dress that suited her perfectly, elegant and strong and beautiful beyond description. When Monsignor Benedetto pronounced them husband and wife, when Adriano lifted her veil and kissed her as their families cheered, he felt the completion of something he hadn't realized was missing from his life. Not just love, not just partnership, but true unity with someone who challenged and supported and completed him. The reception was everything his mother had envisioned, elegant, traditional, and joyfully celebratory. But the moment that mattered most to Adriano was their first dance, when the world narrowed to just the two of them moving together to music that spoke of love and commitment and forever. "Ti amo, Mrs. Romano," he whispered against her ear as they swayed together. "I love you too, Mr. Romano. Always." 18 months after their wedding, Zara sat in the nursery of their Lincoln Park home, gently rocking their 3-month-old daughter to sleep. Little Isabella had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined spirit, and she'd already wrapped the entire Romano family around her tiny fingers. Adriano stood in the doorway watching them, still amazed by the domestic happiness that had replaced the violence and uncertainty of their early relationship. Their security consulting business was thriving, combining his knowledge of organizational leadership with her tactical expertise to provide protection services for high-profile clients across the country. More importantly, they'd created something beautiful together, a marriage built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, a family rooted in love rather than obligation, a life that honored tradition while embracing progress. The phone rang softly, and Adriano answered it quietly to avoid waking the baby. "Yes, Mr. Romano? This is Detective Martinez with Chicago PD. I'm calling about a consultation request. We have a situation involving organized crime, and we need someone who understands both sides of the equation." Adriano looked at his wife and daughter, at the peaceful domestic scene that represented everything he'd fought to protect and build. "We'll need full disclosure about the threats involved," he said. "My wife and I work as a team, and we have a family to consider." "Of course. Would tomorrow morning work for an initial meeting? We'll be there." As he ended the call, Zara looked up with a questioning expression. "New case?" "Potentially. Are you interested?" She smiled, the same confident expression he'd fallen in love with in his penthouse kitchen over 2 years ago. "Always, partner. Always." Outside their window, Chicago glittered in the evening light, a city full of dangers and opportunities, challenges and possibilities. But inside their home, surrounded by love and trust and the family they'd built together. Adriano Romano felt truly safe for the first time in his life. And in the security business, as Zara Williams Romano could attest, safety was the most precious commodity of all. Some stories end with the elimination of threats and the promise of happily ever after. This one ended with something better. The beginning of a partnership strong enough to face whatever came next, together.